this session, I would like to share with you my passion for a group of organisms that I have long been fascinated by. When I was a student at Sheffield University studying zoology, I had a lecturer called Dr. John Messenger, and he was something of a worldwide expert on a group of organisms called cephalopod mollusks. They include octopus, squid and cuttlefish, and they are, I think, a really remarkable group of organisms because they have a very unique physiology and anatomy, and they are unique almost amongst invertebrates in terms of their intelligence and their lifestyle and their adaptations. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about them by way of intro, and then we're going to move on to do a dissection in due course. So as I mentioned, cephalopod mollusks, and in particular I'm going to be talking about the squid, they are of course invertebrates, which means they do not have, as we do, an endoskeleton, an internal skeleton of any sort. In fact, they have no skeleton of any sort and very few hard parts of their body. So instead they have a soft body, which looks something like this. I'm going to just talk you through the anatomy of the squid, but first just to tell you a little bit about their sort of history and their evolution. So they would have originated about 400 million years ago from marine mollusks, which would have been benthic. They would have lived on the seafloor, and they would have had a shell, much like terrestrial mollusks like snails. Obviously slugs have lost theirs as well. Somewhere in their evolutionary history, they hit upon the sort of evolutionary strategy of enabling that shell to be filled with gas, which enabled them to be buoyant and to rise off the seabed, and therefore become pelagic. And there are still organisms alive today that do that. So the chambered nautilus has gas-filled chambers which can control its buoyancy in the water column. The squid has subsequently lost that shell and become, and actually it has a vestigial remnant of that. It has what's called a pen inside, and we'll talk about that later. And that's the sort of evolutionary remnant of that molluscan shell, but it's become internalized and it's not really used for buoyancy, more for sort of stabilizing the mantle. So they've lost their shell, but they are still soft-bodied, and so they are very vulnerable to predation. So in the water column, there's lots of fast-moving aquatic predators. And so they've had 500 million years or so of evolution to survive, and they have survived. You know, they outlived the dinosaurs and all their contemporaries from those long ago eras. And they've done that with some remarkable adaptations. And I just want to talk you through some of those, and then we're going to investigate some by dissection. So as I mentioned, they've got a soft body, no shell. They've got this internalized pen, which we'll have a look at. And they are pelagic, so they move about in the water column, and they have this fantastic torpedo shape. They're very streamlined. They move about in this direction. They do that by firing water out of this siphon. The siphon is just here. So they fire water out from this is called their mantle cavity, the main sort of torpedo, and they fire out water through this siphon, which gives them this kind of jet propulsion. They can move very, very quickly. In fact, they are the fastest moving invertebrates of any kind, and they are fantastically quick. As a diver who's been lucky enough to dive and seen squid, when you try and approach them, if they don't want to be around you, they are gone. They're very, very quick with this jet propulsion. So this is the mantle cavity. They can take water in to the mantle through here, and they fire it out by muscular contraction through the siphon, which is here. The mantle cavity also houses their internal organs. So they have a heart. In fact, they actually have three. They have a systemic heart and two brachial hearts, and the stomach and the gills are in there as well. And obviously the famous thing about cephalopod mollusks is they have these, well, most people would probably call them tentacles. In fact, squid only have 2 tentacles, excuse me, they have 8 arms. So if you look, 2 of these appendages are much longer than the others. They are what's called the feeding tentacles, and then they have 8 arms. And in the middle of all of those appendages, there is a very interesting bird-like beak. So there is a sort of parrot-like beak right in the middle of all those appendages, which is how they eat their food. So what they can do is they can shoot out these feeding tentacles which grab hold of their prey, usually fish, they pull it back in, and then they use these arms to manipulate the food into their beak. It's be swallowed down the esophagus, which actually runs through the middle of their donut-shaped brain, between their eyes, and into their stomach, and their stomach is obviously housed in the mantle cavity as well. The feeding tentacles have these, in fact we'll see when we do the dissection, they are mainly suckerless all the way down. The arms have suckers along their entire length. The feeding tentacles don't have suckers on their entire length. They have no suckers on this part, and then 2 very heavily suckered parts at the end called clubs, and they're what they use to grab hold of the fish and pull it back into that beak. They have huge eyes, of course. The giant squid's eyes are the largest of any organism. They are the size of dinner plates. They are really formidable. Another adaptation that they have is they have this amazing ability to change colour. So they have these things in their skin which are common with cuttlefish and octopus and other members of the cephalopod mollusk group. Bags of pigment essentially surrounded by a muscle, and the squid can actually contract that muscle to reveal more of the pigment or relax it to reveal less of the pigment in this little sac by contracting or relaxing the muscle. And in doing so, it can change its entire appearance to blend in with a dark background or a light background in the case of the squid, counter shading against the seabed or the bright surface. Or in the case of an octopus, even more advanced, they can actually colour match their background and have additional muscles to change the texture of their skin as well. So it's an amazing capability, these cephalopod chromatophores. One thing that allows them to do is something called counter shading. So because they're pelagic, they get predators. They might have predators approaching from below or above. If a predator is approaching from below, what they can do is show light colours underneath and essentially blend in with the bright surface of the water. Whereas if there is a predator from above, they will display dark colours on the surface, so they will blend with the darker colour sea floor. So they are very good at blending in with their environment, and this is an amazing capability. Having seen this firsthand underwater, it's almost like an invisibility cloak. The animal just vanishes. And that, coupled with the speed, means that they are very adept at evading capture by their predators. They have another defence, which is they have ink, and you may know this about octopus and squid. They can produce ink. They squirt that from their ink gland, which again we'll see with the dissection. They squirt it out through the siphon, which is here, into the water body, and it is a mild irritant, so it can irritate the eyes of the shark or any other predator. It will also, they can control the viscosity of that ink, so it will actually hold a shape in the water which is roughly the same shape and size as the squid. The squid will jet away with its jet propulsion, and the cloud of ink will stay in form and be attacked by the predator. In the meantime, the squid is long gone. So they have this ink, they have chromatophores, this colour changing ability, they are intelligent, they have a highly developed nervous system, good vision, all of these amazing sort of gadgetry that's enabled them to survive for so many millions of years, and I think that makes them really, really fascinating. Hopefully you'll agree that these are truly fantastic creatures with as close anatomy as we'll probably experience to something that is very alien. It's very, very different to how we experience the world, but they are comparable in terms of they're highly intelligent, and they are much more relatable, I think, than say a slug, which is also, of course, a mollusk. I think anyone who watched the program My Octopus Teacher, which is on Netflix, I recommend you see it if you haven't already. You can't fail to be sort of moved by the connection that the guy has with the octopus, and how they seem to have some sort of there's some sort of empathy, some sort of thinking going on there. So the main features of the squid, then, they've got the mantle cavity here, which contains all the internal organs. These are fins, which are used for stability and swimming. They take water into the mantle through the collar here, and then expel water through the siphon here for that jet propulsion. They've got these large eyes, these 8 arms, and 2 feeding tentacles, both of which bring food down towards this beak. So we're going to explore the anatomy of this squid through dissection. It's a really brilliant dissection to do because you can see a lot of unique features of the organism. It's really, really interesting, so hopefully you'll enjoy it. So this is the squid. You can see it spread out like this. This is what I call the dorsal view. So we're looking now as if we were looking at the squid down on top of the squid as it would be in the water. So this is the upper surface, the dorsal side of the squid. And you can see this is dark, relatively dark, as you'll see when we turn it over and look at the other side. This is relatively dark compared to the other side. Some of the skin has actually started to come away here, but you can see these little red dots. So this material all over, these little red dots are the chromatophores. So they're the little bags of pigment I was talking about earlier, with the individual muscles that relax and contract to reveal more or less of the pigment for the squid to change colour. We just look at the features of the squid, the external features before we do any dissection. That's really important when you do a dissection. It's to not get too excited about sort of cutting into the specimen straight away, and really have a look at the external features. So I'm going to talk you through the external features of the squid before we do any dissection. So remember, this is the mantle cavity. So this whole section here is the mantle cavity. It's covered in this amazing skin with these chromatophores, which we'll have a closer look at shortly. And then it's got these two fins either side of the mantle, these two fins here. These fins are for sort of stability and steering, I suppose, in the water, to allow the squid the ability to maneuver and to turn very, very quickly. They are extremely fast, 20 to 25 miles an hour they can move, and those fins help them to sort of stabilize themselves in the water. This one's slightly damaged when the squids got caught. So the mantle cavity and the fins are there, and then we move down, and obviously this is the head and the sort of the main features of the squid. As I mentioned, they have 8 arms. We can count them: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 2 feeding tentacles. Unfortunately, in the process of capture, this one has been damaged. So he's lost half of one of the feeding tentacles, which would have been here. The other one is intact. So there are 8 arms. I start with the fattest arms at the outside, and they go in, and these ones in the middle are actually quite small for the sort of the minute manipulation of the food items into the mouth and the beak that we'll see shortly. So you've got the mantle cavity and the fins, and then down this end we've got the head, we've got the 8 arms, 2 feeding tentacles. And the interesting thing about the difference between the arms and the tentacles, the arms have suckers all the way down. So the suckers start right at the base, near to the mouth, and they go all the way down, right down to the tip of the arm. And those are used for manipulating food into the beak, which is inside. The feeding tentacles, on the other hand, don't have suckers all the way down. So they are suckerless for most of their length, all the way down here, until you get to this very heavily suckered portion at the end. This is called the club, and there are lots of suckers on here because this is the actual part that's used to grasp the prey item, the fish. So the squid shoots these out via muscular contraction. It shoots them out, uses these suckers on the end of the club to grab hold of the fish, pulls that back into the mouth, and then uses the arms to manipulate the food item into the beak, and then in the beak is obviously used to then swallow it down into the esophagus, which incidentally runs between the eyes and in fact through the middle of the donut-shaped brain. I'll just show you the other side of the squid so that we can have a look at all the external features before we actually start dissecting. So if I flip it over to what's called the ventral side, the first thing you'll see is that it's much lighter. Obviously this is a camouflage strategy. So if the squid, being a pelagic animal, is in the water column, if it's viewed from underneath, as we're looking at it now, it wants to be camouflaged against the bright surface of the ocean. Whereas if it's viewed from the top looking down, it wants to be camouflaged against the darker seabed. So this counter shading is something the squid can switch on and off. It can flip it around if it wants to, because each of these chromatophores is innervated by an individual nerve. So they can create patterns, they can create shading, they can vanish in the blink of an eye. So they're able to do this through this amazing skin. I'll show you some close-ups of that as well shortly. The other thing you can see on the ventral side that you can't see on the dorsal side is the siphon. So this is the siphon here, and this is a little sort of funnel. You can see the opening to it there, and this is how the squid moves. So it moves through jet propulsion. So it's incredibly fast, fastest animal without a backbone. And what the squid does is it takes in water into its mantle cavity this is essentially all muscle. This whole sort of sheath is muscle, and it can take water in through here, and then it can actually close off this opening. It can close off this entrance to the mantle and then contract these muscles and shoot the water out. And the only way for the water to go once this mantle is closed is out through the siphon. So it can fire a jet, just like a garden hose, fire a jet of water out through this siphon, and obviously when the water shoots that way, the squid shoots that way, and off it goes, jetting out of the way of predators. So that's the siphon. It can control the direction of this very easily. It's got some muscles which link to it here called the siphon retractor muscles. So it can control that in any direction. It can move pretty much in any direction. You may know about squid and their ink. They produce ink as a defense against predators. The ink is produced by a little gland, the ink sac, which is in here, which we'll have a look at later. And it's squirted out through this siphon. And because they have a lot of control over their siphon, they can actually almost draw in the water with their ink. And they can create a shape, because the ink's quite viscous, that roughly resembles the shape of the squid, same size and rough shape. The squid jet away, the ink lingers in the water, and the shark or whatever attacks the ink, which irritates its eyes, and the squid gets away. So that's the siphon, which is obviously linked to the ink sac as well. Okay, I'm just going to show you the head in a little bit more detail. So we've had a look at the siphon, we've had a look at the mantle, the fins, the arms, the feeding tentacle, only one of which is left, unfortunately. We're just going to have a look into I've moved it slightly closer so we can have a look into the middle of these arms, because this is really what makes the squid such a formidable predator. So very, very fast. They can shoot out these feeding tentacles at lightning speed. They pull in their prey into the middle of these arms. And what you see here is in the middle of this, the arms, there's something called the buccal cavity. This is the buccal mass. And this houses the beak. You can see that I'll show you a close-up of this in a moment, but that black point sticking out is the beak. Obviously squid are invertebrates, so they don't have any bones to pull on with their muscles. So the way the beak works is there is a ring of muscle surrounding two halves of the beak, and when that ring of muscle contracts, the two halves are pulled together, and the two halves of the beak are brought together. You can only see one half poking out there. I can feel the point of it with my thumb. It's very sharp, and that is the beak. So we'll have a closer look at that when I dissect the squid in a moment. The other thing I wanted to show you was the eye. So they obviously have two eyes. They have very, very large eyes. You can see they've got very good vision. So they're very good at, they're visual predators primarily. They look for their prey. They feed on fish and shrimp and so on. So what I'm going to do now is just show you the lens of the eye. So the squid, as I say, really is a visual predator. It relies on its eyes to a large extent. So it's got very well developed eyes, very good vision. And you can actually feel, if you just feel in the eye, you should be able to feel a hard object. And all I'm going to do is make a tiny little snip with my scissors and allow this, some fluid is going to come out, and I'm going to allow the lens to actually come out from its compartment. If I just get behind it, should just come out. There we go. So what I've done now is removed the lens. I'm not sure if you can see that at this distance, but if I use my forceps, we have there a perfect sphere, which is the lens of the eye, and you can actually use this to sort of read some print. It's a very perfectly spherical, just much like human, the lens of a vertebrate eye, in fact, and it allows the squid formidable powers of vision. So that's the lens of the eye. Okay, so to this one, again, I can just feel for the lens inside here, and with a very small cut, I can, make the lens accessible. There we go. And there is the lens from the other eye. So there's the lens, perfect sphere, again giving the squid this remarkable vision. Very similar, as I say, to a vertebrate lens. In fact, it's an example of something called convergent evolution, where we've hit upon the same solution to the problem of very high acuity vision, coming up with these lenses, but via different evolutionary paths. So it's very interesting. Okay, I'm going to show you now the beak and actually extract the beak before we have a look at the internal anatomy of the squid. So if we go into the, as I say, into the middle of the arms here, you'll see this. You know, if the Humboldt squid are 2 meters long, and if you came across one of these guys while you were underwater, you probably, they have a reputation for attacking humans. I'm not sure whether it's really actually true, but certainly the legends of old, of Kraken and so on, these giant sea monsters, you can see where it came from, because this is a formidable predator. They shoot out these feeding tentacles, they grab hold of their prey, they pull it back in, and then using these arms, they manipulate it into this formidable beak. And I'm going to show you this now. So this is the buccal mass, this ring of muscle, and you can actually grab hold of the point of this beak, and I'm just going to pull it out. It actually comes out or it should come out very easily, because it's not attached to muscles directly. It's just surrounded by a ring of muscle. So that is one half of the beak. You can see the point there, and there is a corresponding second half. Just remove now, just depending on the orientation. There it is. There is the second half, and those two points come together. And these form a sort of parrot-like beak. They bite together with considerable force and allow the squid to chomp and swallow its prey. So the beak in two separate halves, really remarkable thing. Okay, so we're now ready to cut into the squid and have a look at some of the internal features, having looked at the exterior features and removed the lens and the beak. So we've got the squid in a ventral orientation, so this is the underside of the squid. I'm going to cut open down the mantle cavity here and open it up and have a look what's inside, and so I can show you some of the features there. So all I'm going to do here is just lift up the sort of collar of the mantle so that I don't damage any of the organs inside, and I'm just going to use my scissors. I'm just going to cut down the length of the mantle and show you what's inside. Incidentally, those that enjoy eating squid, the calamari rings that you enjoy eating are actually cross sections of this mantle cavity. So they just they remove all the internal organs and just cut into rings and deep fried, and that's calamari rings. This is all muscle, and as you know, if you eat meat, what you're eating is muscle usually. So this is all edible, and we're going to cut down the length of the mantle cavity and open it up. And I'm just going to be holding this away from the internal organs just to make sure I don't cut into anything below. Oh wow, now, I've never seen that before. This squid has eaten quite a large fish. Look at that. It was just within the mantle cavity, so I think what probably happened is that the fish got into the mantle cavity, perhaps in a net or when the squid was caught. So we have a look at some of the internal features. That's a nice bonus. This webbing is called the peritoneum. It's here, so this protects the internal organs of the squid. As I mentioned before, some of the internal organs that you can see. We follow the siphon. So this is the siphon. You can see now that is a hole. That's a tube that water shoots out of here. This is the jet propulsion of the squid. So it shoots along by shooting water out of there, and it controls the direction of that with these two muscles here. So these are the siphon retractor muscles. These two very strong muscles it uses to direct that siphon around so that it can control itself in the water. This slightly silvery fish-like organ is the ink sac. It's really nicely full actually. It's quite surprising. Often when you dissect these squid, the ink sac is not very full because in the process of catching, the squids are obviously fairly panicked and they ink, and they often release a lot of their ink, but this is quite full, so we'll have a look at that ink sac later. I'm not going to burst it now because it was going to get ink everywhere, but you can see a bit of ink coming out here, and it would release this ink into the water that's shooting out the siphon, and then use the siphon to draw, as it were, in the water to confuse the predators. These two feathery structures, I'll just spread them out so you can see. There's one here and one here. These are the gills. So these, as all good biologists know, surface area is key when you're exchanging materials and exchanging gases particularly. So these are large feathery structures, and they're actually very, very convoluted. They have a huge surface area, so large feathery gills, one each side, so two gills there going off, and various other structures that we can see in here. And I'm just going to expose this a little bit more, and you can have a look at what else is inside. We've seen the two gills. Squid actually have three hearts, remarkably. So they have two brachial hearts, which are hearts to supply the gills with blood. And there's one here. You can just about see this structure here, and another one here at the base of each gill. And you can just about see pinkish in structure. Under there is what's called the systemic heart, which supplies the rest of the body, the muscles, with blood. This is a male squid. We can see that because the female squid has two very prominent white glands here called the nidamental glands, which are for producing the egg cases. This one doesn't have that. Instead, it has this sort of amorphous mass up here, which is all for sperm production. And also it has a penis. So the glands for producing the fluid and so on that goes into the sperm production are here. And if we follow this down, this structure here is actually the squid's penis. What it does is they swim next to the female, and he uses this to deposit a packet of sperm into the female's gill cavity, and she then uses that to fertilize her eggs. So this is a male squid with penis there. Gills, we can see systemic heart and brachial hearts, and we can actually see the stomach here. So if you look closely, you can see this area of sort of grayer mass under here. What I'm going to do is try and just dissect this out a little bit so that we can have a look at the contents of the stomach. So we can see what the squid has been eating I did this one time, and a boy did actually find a complete intact fish inside the stomach. That one hasn't been eaten by the squid, but so you can see this grey lump here. Just going to try to remove some of this connective tissue, this peritoneum here, and see if we can get the stomach out, sort of extrude that a little bit. And you can see in here, this is a sort of marble effect. There are fish bones, scales, all that kind of thing in there. So this is the stomach contents. This goes down into an area called the cecum, which is just under here, which is where all the absorption happens. But this is a really nice tactile thing because I can feel the scales and the perhaps little remnants of crustacean exoskeletons in there. It's really kind of like sandy and gritty, and that's the stomach with all the contents of the squid's diet in there. So we've got the stomach, we've got, this is all reproductive organs. We've got the gonad up here for the production of the sperm, the penis down here. This is the intestine, the gills, the brachial hearts, the systemic heart, and the ink sac. So what I'm going to do now is try to show you a little bit further in terms of how the squid actually moves, and show you the pen, which is the evolutionary remnant of the molluscan shell. So the best way to actually have a look at the pen is just to remove all of the internal organs of the squid in one go, and I can do that quite easily by just holding the body of the squid and the head, and I can just feel for the pen here underneath. See, just by pulling, we should be able to just lay those out, all intact, the internal organs. And you can see this is the mantle cavity left behind, and what you can see here is the pen. So this structure, which slides into the mantle cavity, is what we call the pen. It looks just like plastic, and it's sort of feather-shaped structure, and it is all that remains of the sort of shell of old, of sort of archetypal mollusks. It allows the mantle to be rigid and not to be floppy, so allow it to sort of propel through the water. It's an internalized remnant of the shell. You may be familiar with cuttlefish. Cuttlefish have what's called a cuttle bone, which people put in budgie cages for them to peck to get their calcium. It's a similar idea, but this is even further reduced than it is in the cuttlefish. That's a sort of just a very buoyant, as I say, surfboard-shaped kind of bone. This is even further reduced. It's just a very simple pen to provide a bit of stability for the mantle as it jets through the water. Really nice structure. And I'm just going to remove the mantle cavity, the mantle over here for one moment. So I'm just going to try and open up the stomach and see if we can see some of the contents from the stomach. As I say, you can see this kind of like grey mass here. Just cut away some of this tissue, and you know, you unfortunately can't feel it, but you can see this where it connects to the rest of the digestive system. I'm actually going to just cut that off and see if I can access some of the stuff that's in here. Just see what we can see. And it's quite, you can see fish bones. There should be some shrimp, probably shrimp or small crustacean, crab shells, that kind of thing. In fact, I'll just cut straight across. Yeah, I mean, all of this kind of stuff is shell, bone. You can feel it's really gritty. There is, how interesting, there is a lens from another squid's eye. Squid are not averse to eating one another. Large species eat smaller species. There is actually a lens from a squid's eye in there. In fact, there are several. So this squid, this squid has eaten a lot of other squid. There's one, two. So it's eaten fish scales. I can feel. You can see here. So he's definitely eaten squid, because fish don't have lenses like that in their eyes. He's definitely eaten fish. There's lots of fish bones in here, lots of hard parts. You can feel some fish bones, vertebrae, and so on. So just like when you dissect an owl pellet or something like that, you can find out a lot about the lifestyle of the animal, the diet, from what it's eaten. So yeah, squid often do prey on other squid. One of the things that they eat. I'm just going to show you the ink sac again, because one thing that's quite nice, if you've got a pen and you've got ink, then you can use the pen and dip it in the ink and potentially write your name. I would save this till the end because it does often make a bit of a mess. So I'm going to try and just open up a small amount of a small hole in the ink sac. Now you can see straight away probably there is a little black dot. I'm not sure if you can see at that distance, but there's a black dot here getting bigger as I expand that. And then I'm going to try and dip the sharp end of my pen into that ink and see if I can write something. I've just moved the camera along a bit so you can see. So here you can see the ink leaking out. And I'm going to dip my pen in the ink and try and write something. I need to write it upside down so that you can see it. I'm going to write it from my perspective because it's very difficult for me to write backwards and upside down. I'm going to write the word sepia. Sepia is the genus that cuttlefish belong to, who are another cephalopod mollusk, and their ink was used to produce the first photographs, which are still called sepia, that kind of brownish ink. So I'm dipping the pen in the ink sac now. You can see the ink coming out, and I'm using that to write the word sepia in homage to the cuttlefish whose ink was used for some of the first photographs. So, as I say, the ink is a great defense for the cephalopods. Can confuse and bewilder and cause predators to attack. And I've now used that. I'm not sure you can quite see that. And it will be upside down to you. So I'm just going to turn it around for you to show you. There we go. The word sepia. So I hope you enjoyed that introduction to the anatomy of what I believe is a truly remarkable creature and a truly remarkable group of organisms. You've seen their very alien-like bodies with the mantle cavity and these huge eyes and their 8 arms and 2 feeding tentacles and the formidable beak and the ink sac, and we've used the ink to write with. You know, this is a remarkable adaptation that these organisms have. So I hope you enjoyed it, and look forward to any questions that you might have. Cheers.